In March, an oil pipeline owned and operated by ExxonMobil blew up underneath a suburban neighborhood in Mayflower, Arkansas. We covered this pipeline explosion a lot when it happened. That Exxon pipeline was carrying crude oil. The people who lived right on top of it did not even know the pipeline was there until it blew up. And when it did blow up, it rendered an entire neighborhood essentially uninhabitable. Some of the houses, Exxon ended up just buying them outright. This week, they started knocking the houses down with heavy equipment. There goes the neighborhood. That Mayflower, Arkansas oil spill was a spill of about 5,000 barrels of crude oil. It was a big spill. About a year and a half before that, another oil pipeline blew up along the Yellowstone River in Billings, Montana. That, again, was an Exxon pipeline. And again, the environmental impact was just disgusting and disastrous. Toxic crude oil pouring into the previously pristine Yellowstone River. That Yellowstone River oil spill was a spill of nearly 2,000 barrels of crude oil. So 5,000 barrels in Arkansas, 2,000 barrels in Montana. A year before Montana, there was another big oil spill along the Trans-Alaska oil pipeline system just outside of Fairbanks. That was the third largest spill ever along that pipeline. That spill in Alaska was about the size of the big Arkansas spill. That was about 5,000 barrels of crude oil. These are all considered to be big spills. These were serious accidents. Well, today we learned about a brand new U.S. oil spill that was not 2,000 barrels like Yellowstone or even 5,000 barrels like Alaska or Arkansas. Now, the new one that we've got now is 20,000 barrels, 4 times larger than the spill that crippled the city of Mayflower, Arkansas earlier this year, and that largest spill in Alaska. This latest spill happened in North Dakota. It's a pipeline operated by a Texas-based oil company, and it just dumped 20,000 barrels of crude oil into a rural North Dakota field. The leak was actually first discovered about a week and a half ago by a local wheat farmer, but we're just now starting to learn about the scope of it. This appears to be the biggest U.S. oil spill since 2010, when an Enbridge oil pipeline dumped about the same amount of oil, about 20,000 barrels, into the Kalamazoo River in Michigan. That spill is still being cleaned up 3 years later. Officials today in North Dakota say they have no idea what caused the new North Dakota spill or how long the pipeline was spewing for. They also say that as best as they can tell right now, it doesn't threaten any major sources of water, for which they are very grateful. We keep having oil pipeline spills in this country. The federal agency that regulates the transportation of oil by pipeline in this country is called the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Back on October 1st, which was government shutdown day, the agency said that the government shutdown would not affect them right away. They said their offices would remain open for business during the shutdown. But by today, that has now changed. A spokeswoman for the agency said they have had enough money to operate through this week, but, quote, I don't know how long we can operate next week. So the agency that regulates oil pipelines in this country, that agency looks like it's going dark in a few days. Even the specific agency that is responsible not just for regulations, but for guaranteeing the safety of our oil pipelines, for making sure that no more of them pop off like geysers in a cul-de-sac in Arkansas, the Pipeline Safety Organization has already furloughed nearly 2/3 of its staff. We're not shutting down the pipelines, we're just shutting down pipeline safety. Back in North Dakota, a Reuters reporter started calling around to find out about the environmental impact of this latest big oil spill. But alas, quote, the regional EPA office could not be reached because of the government shutdown. If you live in North Dakota, or if you are particularly concerned about oil spills, or maybe this is the story that makes you concerned about the government shutdown if you hadn't been already. But there's a story like this everywhere right now. Take your pick. What are you mad about? Are you mad about the oil spill in North Dakota that the local EPA office is not there to even try to respond to? Are you mad about these 7,000 kids who've already been thrown out of preschool with more thousands to come? Are you mad about the families of soldiers killed in Afghanistan not receiving death benefits after their loved ones were killed in the war that didn't stop just because the government did? Are you mad about your local national park being shut down? In one Utah county, they said today they are so mad about it, they're going to engage in county-wide civil disobedience. They are considering reopening the park illegally in that one county. That's how mad they are. The shutdown is not a Washington thing. It is not an amorphous political story. It has these real practical consequences increasingly all over the country. And whether you are mad about it in the abstract or you are mad about it in the specific way that it affects you personally in your town, It turns out Americans are really mad about this. People are mad. People are more mad about this shutdown than they were about the last shutdown back in 1995 and 1996. And that one went on for twice as long as this one has already. People were really mad about that shutdown back then. But the new numbers from NBC News and the Wall Street Journal poll that's out tonight, the new numbers out tonight show that Americans are even more angry about this shutdown than they were about that one. Why are people more mad this time around? And is this going to change the way that government works and how people feel about government once it finally, someday, opens back up? Joining us now for the interview is Barney Frank. He's a former Democratic congressman of Massachusetts. He was serving in Congress during the 95 shutdown. Mr. Chairman, it's good to have you back on the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Rachel.
Why do you think people were more angry about the shutdown? Why are people more angry about the shutdown now than they were back in 1995?
Well, for one thing, people are just angrier in general today. And I think, I'm trying to write about this now, look, there has been an erosion in the economic position of the average American. People are angrier today about the general circumstance because they have seen a progression of this trend in which a handful of people get very rich and other people are not well off. Now, there's a paradox here. Sadly, that has led to people being angry about government. So I think if you had polled a month ago and asked people what was their attitude towards government, it would have been more negative than it was before the shutdown in 95. And therefore, it is, to me, frankly, a pleasant surprise that people are now even angrier at the shutdown. And I would say two things about it. First of all, I have never seen a spectacle of barefaced hypocrisy compounded by stupidity than my former Republican colleagues, whose basic position is this. One, we are going to shut down the government. And two, we are now unpleasantly surprised that this government function isn't happening and that government functioning isn't happening and the other government functioning isn't happening. You have to ask them, what the hell did you think was going to happen when you shut down the government? Did you not understand that that meant that these government functions, whether it's the national parks or death benefits or health research, that they were going to be shut down? It is a dissociation from reality that is bizarre. But the second thing it has done is to remind a lot of the American people that government's a good thing. We've had this kind of disconnect. We've created somehow in this country, with regard to government, a whole that is smaller than the sum of the parts. You ask people if they like government, and the answer is, oh, I don't like government. What about Medicare? What about Head Start? What about the parks? What about the environmental protection? Oh, I like that. Well, what people have now been reminded is that this abstract entity that they said they disliked is not an abstract entity. It is a collection of vital services that are important to the quality of their lives. And I hope out of this will come some renewed understanding of that point.
One of the things that has made tonight kind of, I guess, an exciting night in this process, at least a night when we're anticipating that something might happen, is that the Republicans, for the first time tonight, said they might be willing to at least go forward with a short-term extension of the debt ceiling. Who knows how that's going to work out? But one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about that is that you were the chair of the House Financial Services Committee in your tenure in Congress. And we have seen in this fight a lot of Republicans in the House, including some of them who were on that committee, like South Carolina Congressman Mick Mulvaney, saying, hitting the debt ceiling is no big deal. I don't think it would cause that much harm to the country. I don't think we need to worry about breaching the debt ceiling. That's what made that part of this crisis possible up until tonight, when it seemed like it finally might start to get resolved. Could you address that sort of denialism among Republican members of the House on that?
Sure, although I want to preface my criticism of my former colleague Mick Mulvaney with my continued affection for his willingness to join us in cutting the military budget, a project you and I care a lot about, Rachel. I will give Mick Mulvaney credit for being one of the few intellectually honest budget cutters on the Republican side, because he does understand the Pentagon should be on the table for that. But beyond that, look, there is a concept I'm going to borrow now from my think theology, invincible ignorance. You're a better scholar than I. You can correct me if I'm using it wrong. But I think that's what you have here, people who are just determined to ignore one truth after another. I mean, I'm trying to remember what literary character said, I can believe so many impossible things before breakfast. Well, that was apparently the Tea Party. This denial on the debt limit is just astounding. Fortunately, and again, there's a silver lining to this cloud. They've denied that there is climate change going on. They've denied a number of things, like where President Obama was born. But I think the implausibility of this denial is so great that it's calling into question the denial reflex in general. And in particular, one of the groups in this country who have most disappointed me in the last few years have been the leaders of the financial community, our business people, highly educated, very sophisticated, who were so angry at Democrats, me among them, because we tried to regulate them and we tried to stop them from the reckless practices that caused economic disaster, that they were funding and supporting wackos, people who actually were acting against what they knew to be the case, people trying to undermine the ability of the Federal Reserve to help the European crisis. And it's now finally gotten to the point where even some of these financial people whose feelings we hurt, to the point where they weren't thinking clearly, they are finally saying to these right-wing Republicans, no, you're going too far. And I think the dynamic, Rachel, if I may, is this, and this is why I've been saying all along, I think this is how it's going to be resolved. The people driving this, the very right-wing Republicans who run that party now because of their domination of the Republican communications machinery and the primary voters, they won't lose their seats. But I think enough other Republicans have now come to them and said, look, if you keep this up, we will lose our seats. And you may not care about that except for the fact that you'll be in the minority. And the dynamic here politically, I think, is very clear. Enough Republicans who were afraid to stand up to the Tea Party, afraid of maybe a primary challenge in their own situation, are now going to the Speaker and going to the Tea Party people and saying to them, you will hold your seats and be in the minority. And it is the fear of losing the majority, which I think is now very plausible. Those numbers that you were showing, yeah, they are jaw-dropping. No party can hold the House with those numbers. I don't care how gerrymandered it is.
Gary Frank. I was going to say Barney Frank, former Democratic congressman in Massachusetts. Congressman, thank you for being with us tonight. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Rachel, as always.
So the congressman there used the word wackos in its technical sense. For those of you who have ever wondered if America's particular brand of conservative wacko translates abroad in foreign countries, we have an incredible story of a uniquely right-wing American export coming up on the show. This is an exclusive. We've been working on this story for a long time, and it's coming up. Stay with us.